Global value chains, or GVCs, represent the principle of division of labor extended to an international or global scale. In GVCs, the production of goods and services takes place by breaking up the production process into small parts, each of which takes place in a different country. The idea of the division of labor in a single place is very old. Think of Adam Smith's pin factory back in 1776, where each worker did a different task. Value is added in every task: unwinding the wire, cutting the wire, sharpening the point of the pin, or making the pin head. But it all takes place in one location. Or think of Henry Ford's River Rouge factory in the 1920s, where raw materials entered into one end and finished automobiles came out the other end. Since the automobile is a more complex product than a pin, there are many more tasks taking place in this huge factory than in the pin factory, each adding value. But they're still all organized in one place, or at least all the raw materials are brought to this place where everything else happens. Now, in the last several decades, this type of division of labor has become global. Advances in transport and communication, such as container ships, modern logistics, cheap telecommunications, and the internet, mean that the production of a laptop computer or a jet aircraft may be divided up among a dozen or more countries. The activity which defines GVCs is sometimes called trading in tasks. It can also be called slicing up the value chain or production fragmentation. All of these terms suggest the idea that different parts of a good can be produced in different countries, depending on where each step can be done most efficiently. This international division of labor is not limited to the physical production of goods. Activities like R&D, design, assembly, marketing, and post-sale service to customers are all necessary to bring goods to market. Most of those activities look more like services than like goods, but they're all part of the value chain, and they can all be located in different countries. Even services themselves can have their own value chains. For example, when a hospital in the United States relies on overnight radiology services that take place in India. Why are GVCs important for economic development? Under the earlier model of industrialization, developing countries had a difficult choice. They could either try to establish the whole production process of a complex good, like autos, which could be very costly and inefficient, or they could give up on manufacturing altogether and just remain specialized in agriculture or mining. But with GVCs, it's possible to enter the value chain by doing one task or a few tasks, which is much easier than reproducing the whole value chain. Smaller and lower income countries, which might find it hard to establish a whole auto industry, can enter into auto GVCs by producing ignition wiring sets, for example. Or they could enter into apparel GVCs by performing the task of cutting and sewing. What makes all this possible? GVCs are organized by lead firms, which work with many partners around the world to organize and divide up all these tasks. In electronics, the lead firm could be a designer of goods with a big brand name. In apparel, it could be a retailer. Unlike the classic multinationals of the 1970s, which tended to own facilities all around the world and control them all, a lead firm is unlikely to own every step of the production process around the world. They are much more likely to organize a network of relationships and contracts that gets the job done, working together with many partners. Developing countries thus participate in GVCs by having qualified local firms enter into relationships with lead firms. The idea of a global value chain suggests that goods in GVCs are made in the world, to use the phrase of former WTO chief Pascal Lamy. But the production of many goods tends to focus on regions of the world, and so one can speak of regional value chains. Examples of regional value chains include the electronics value chain in East Asia and the automotive value chains focused on the United States, Germany, and Japan, each one with a separate regional value chain. Now, economists also speak of supply chains. Now, is a supply chain the same as a value chain or not? Sometimes the phrase supply chain is used interchangeably with value chain, as if they're synonyms. More properly, supply chains are about the business of moving goods and services around, the world of ships and ports, planes, roads and railroads, of third-party logistics companies, of customs and border procedures. The term trade facilitation is about making supply chains more efficient. It often refers particularly just to the customs and border procedures. The topic of supply chains is of key importance for global value chains because the success of GVCs depends on fast, cheap, and predictable performance of the supply chains that underlie them. How can we measure countries' participation in GVCs? The traditional export and import data do not go far enough. A cell phone may show up as made in China in the traditional trade data, but the whole phone isn't really made in China. For example, the touch screen may come from Japan, the speaker might come from Korea, and the processor may be made in the Philippines. Thus, the cell phone embodies value for many different countries, in each of which wages and profits are earned in the process of bringing the phone to market. New forms of data, such as trade and value-added data, have emerged to stand alongside the official data in order to help show what is the real contribution of trade to standards of living and development, and what is the contribution of each country in the value chain. We can also ask questions about the position of a country's firms in GVCs in order to try to get a deeper understanding of what's going on. Is the country in question host to the lead firms which organize GVCs? Or does it have mainly firms that supply to the lead firms? Put differently, is the country on the center or the periphery of the GVCs it participates in? We want to know that because the lead firm captures much of the value added in many value chains. Are the lead firms and principal suppliers domestic owned or foreign owned? You may have both kinds. It's important to be able to attract foreign investment in order to access technology, brands, and production methods that are essential to making the GVC work. But it's also important to have strong linkages to domestic firms in the GVCs so that the benefits of participating in the value chain are distributed more widely. We can also ask whether a country that we're looking at participates heavily in GVC activity, that is to say, in the production of complex products, or is it primarily specialized in primary products like oil or wheat? In a wider sense, even primary products represent the first step of GVC participation because somebody buys those products and transforms them into something else. For example, crude oil is the first step in production processes for chemicals, plastics, and rubber. So if you're a crude oil exporter, you might say to yourself, okay, I'm part of a GVC. But the full benefits of being part of the GVC way of organizing production and of all the technological and managerial innovations that go with that are more readily associated with complex products. The question of how to think about primary products is one of many areas in which the place where the old economy stops and the new GVC economy starts is in the eye of the beholder. Regardless of what countries are producing, exporting, and importing, every country is influenced by global value chains in some way. A better understanding of GVCs is essential for developing strategies to harness international trade for economic and social upgrading and rising standards of living.